everyone, and welcome back to the basics track here in our Lake Tahoe Community College onboarding experience. Today, the topic I'll be focusing on is the issue of student emotions. Now, by student emotions, I mean situations in a classroom, whether ISP, DE, or face-to-face, in which students get emotional and have a reaction to something. Could be you, could be another student in the class, could be the content that you're actually teaching, could be a grade in the class. So let's go through some of those scenarios and ask, why do students maybe heighten their emotions or get emotional in your class? One reason for this is it could be a topic in your class conversation. You're discussing something maybe controversial of a political nature, like the debate over abortion. And because it's so political and so emotional, even outside of a classroom setting, that same emotion is brought to bear, brought into the classroom that you're teaching. So what I recommend in this is to really think carefully about any controversial topics that you bring up and how to frame those in such a way that you can quell some of that heavy emotion. Not that emotion is bad, as I'll talk about later. Emotion is great in terms of a classroom setting because it's about engaging students in the materials, immersing them in the context of your class. But too much emotion or emotion that's directed in negative directions can be a challenge for you as an instructor. Now, as I mentioned in some other videos, emotions can also rise when students talk to you about their grades. They might be upset with the particular grade that they received. They might be concerned. They might say to you, I need an A to stay in financial aid or whatever. I think it's really important when grades come up to quell the emotion a little bit and say, the grade you're going to get in the class is based on objective criteria, on the rubric that I've created. It's not based on financial need. It's only based on merit. And hopefully that will help with some of those emotions that students have when grades come up. And we know that grades are emotional. Now, student emotions can also be related to an interpersonal conflict between students. Years ago, I had a situation like this, and it's kind of random. It seems kind of strange hearing it out of context, but we were discussing something of a political nature, and the topic of he's no longer the current CEO of Papa John's Pizza came up. And these two students, I gathered, were on different lines of politics. One was on the left, one was on the right. And they just, for some reason, got really heavy into this discussion about the CEO of Papa John's. And they were respectful of one another, but I did have to tell them after class, hey, let's try to mitigate this a little bit. Let's have a conversation. And I think they were actually better for it. I think they both got some of their energies out. I think they expressed it to the class. They were very excited about the issue, and I'm the last person to say you should quell engage student emotions in the class. If it ever gets personal though, if there's ever insults that are thrown back and forth, then I think that's the moment you need an intervention. And outside of class is a good opportunity if it's a face-to-face class. If it's ISP or DE, there are different ways that you can negotiate those situations, and we can have some conversations in the future about how very specifically to do an intervention in a class setting in which emotions are running really high, particularly if it's conflict between two different students in the class. And then lastly, this is the most challenging one, emotions related to immaturity or behavior. I would say to you right now that if students are emotional about a grade, an argument about a situation in a class, or a particular aspect of content, while those can be challenging, at least the students are engaging sort of in the classroom setting and they're concerned about something. And you can mitigate or you can mediate those situations effectively. If it's immaturity or behavior, if someone is talking in class, they're on their cell phone, they're just acting up or whatever, they can't sit still, that's a more challenging issue. And I think at that point, initially, you would just have to show to the students that you're the authority and you're not going to let them get away with things that are related to immaturity or behavior. So those kind of emotions, I would argue, are never worthy to be brought into a classroom setting because they just disrupt the learning space for all your students and for yourself as an instructor. So some of my recommendations include the following. Try to deal with such situations or scenarios with very sober language and de-escalation techniques. If someone gets upset with you in your office hours related to a grade, if you start saying stuff to them, if you raise your temper or your voice, it's never going to turn out right. And I have to say, I've learned a lot over the years, teaching over 25 years full time. And I think in my early years of teaching, I wasn't very good at it. I would not de-escalate the situation, and I would sometimes try to hold the student accountable, and it wouldn't work out so well, and the student would get even more aggressive in terms of their behavior or language. So as much as possible, sober language and de-escalation techniques. As well, really focus on clarifying your behavioral expectations, particularly with some of those latter ones I mentioned here. If someone is getting aggressive with another student or they're being immature, if you have very clear guidelines on your syllabus about your behavioral expectations, if there's a controversial topic and you know that's coming up, address that in your syllabus and say, have a little heading and say controversial topics, and then give your framework of how you want them effectively and professionally to discuss that issue in the classroom setting. Very important to lay out those expectations, and as I said earlier, for you to maintain your role as the authority figure in the class. And that's the last point here, so just, it's in yellow there, you are the authority figure. Do not let students take control of the class. If they're being too emotional, you're the expert, you're the professor, you're the instructor. Intervene and tell them it's not cool and they have to change their behavior or attitude. Now, as I said earlier, emotions are a very necessary part of a classroom setting. If you read the work of Paulo Freire, the great social justice theorist and pedagogical theorist, but certain types of emotions are not okay. If it's emotions where students are really engaged in an issue, you're teaching a class on addiction studies, and a student opens up in the class, they feel like it's a safe space, and they talk about their struggle with addictions earlier in life, that's a great opportunity to really see the engagement of students in that emotional setting that Paulo Freire is talking about. If it's someone, though, yelling at someone, if it's someone getting really aggressive with you, the instructor, or another student, that is not an effective use of emotions in the classroom. So just be sure to gauge that and to set limits and, again, act as the authority figure so that your students know that only certain emotional displays or engagements will be tolerated in your class. So good luck with all the work that you do as a faculty member here at LTCC, and I'll be back with another video like this in the future.